And we have totally lost sight of that in politics. And those of us who really enjoy politics can sometimes be the worst. You know, we forget, definition of politics I like, why does it matter? Someone once asked me, you know, it was a younger school kid. And I think they think cynically it's all about the pursuit of power. And that's not the point. And it's certainly not about one party over the other. Politics matters because it's history in the present tense. And we all get to participate in it. And that's an honor and a privilege. And what you see when you read history books, you ever notice how when you're reading history books that kind of got to struggle to remember what party the person belonged to? Because it's pretty irrelevant to the larger story of America. And yet, in the moment, we are sold this bill of goods that says it's the only important thing. So, what independence voters and what young voters declaring their independence are doing is a step towards remembering that. That this artificial vision of politics is a lie, that it's dividing us, it is enforcing a harsh, bitter, and artificial partisanship on our nation. It is making us more polarized than we really are. Quickly, those are 10 states where registered independents, not self-identified, registered independents now outnumber Democrats or Republicans. Iowa, New Hampshire, Colorado. Many states in the Northeast, but spread out around the country. That's a wake-up call, too, because, again, this is not what we are taught. It is not what we are told. It is not the vision of false choices that are shouted at us every night on the television. But this is really happening. These are folks proactively registering, not saying, I feel independent, but saying, I'm going to actually change my registration to reflect that. So there is a major change happening. You're not going to see it in Washington, and it's not going to be reflected on your television screens. It is the largest untapped market in American politics. It is consistent with actually the greatest traditions of our nation. George Washington didn't belong to a political party as a matter of principle. He warned in his farewell address against the dangers of party because it inflamed jealousies and divided the country against each other. And we are at a moment right now where the American people are sending a very clear signal from the grassroots up. They are declaring their independence from hyperpartisan politics because it's killing us. It's strangling us. And the parties and the extremes on either side are resisting it every way they know how. But this trend is coming. It is generational. It is happening in registration. And we're going to look back and say, it was crazy one day that we really believed that despite the clear message the American people were sending, that we were offered these false choices in a politics dominated by the extremes. But the one thing it's going to really take to send that message home, and for those people involved in politics it's even more important, is to stand up and say enough. To stand up to the extremes on both sides. Because when you only stand up to the extremes on the other side, you're just perpetuating the problem. Neither party has a monopoly on virtue or vice because it's human nature. We're not going to change human nature. There are always going to be cranks and conspiracy theorists among us. But the more we straighten our civic backbone and stand up to the extremes, especially on our own side, in your own party, that sends an example that starts the change dynamic happening. And real change, not the bumper sticker of it, but really changing the dynamic that more and more people, your constituents, your friends, believe me, they will rise up and they will say thank you. Because there's so many folks who feel politically homeless right now. There's so many folks who feel frustrated with the status quo, but they haven't seen an example of anybody standing up to change the dynamic. And so that's really the basic, most important message, is stand up to the extremes on both sides. And we can bring about the change that we voted for, which has been thwarted from us because our politics keep getting hijacked. So thank you very much, and now I'd love to take your questions.
We have a microphone so that people can, so that we can hear your questions. They're bringing it right to the center here. Tiger Bay members only, and please go to the mic. Anyone?
Mr. Avlon, thank you. Am I on? Hello? Hello.
Yes, sir.
I had the pleasure of reading your first book, Independent Nation. I think it's one, as I told you in the hall, it's one of the two best books I've ever read, and I truly mean that.
Thank you.
How can those who are independents get involved or get elected without some organization? In your first book, you said, in order for any person to get elected, they have to cater to the extreme of their parties, either to the right for the Republicans or to the left for the Democrats, and then eventually they'll bring themselves back to the middle once they get elected. How can independents without some sort of organization get involved in this political arena?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, and I appreciate very much your comments about my first book. You know, the system has been rigged to enforce this bitter and predictable partisanship. And that's why, even in this book, I say that one of the most important things we can do to take America back from the lunatic fringe is redistricting reform. Now, it sounds wonky to some folks, but I'm here to tell you, I believe it is the single most important policy change we can make in this country. Because think about it, you know, congressionally, we've got a 96% re-election rate. It's all safe seats. There are no competitive general elections virtually. And so when you've got congressional seats decided in closed partisan primaries, low turnout, right? Let's say 10%. Let's be generous. Let's say 10% turnout. Well, you all know in this room, 5.1% then makes a majority. It is a paradise for activists and hyperpartisans. It is also deeply disenfranchising to the vast majority of citizens in a community, and literally disenfranchising to independents. So I think one of the first things we need to do is get serious as a country and as states about redistricting reform. You know, parties love it when they're in power, and they complain about it when they're out of power, and you should try to, you know, see it with a larger sense of perspective. It is the core change I think we need to make in our politics, because if there are nonpartisan redistricting commissions and open primaries, the center will be empowered again. We have pushed power to the margins of our politics, and that's one of the reasons the wingnuts are more powerful than ever before, because they have become, in effect, not only the loudest lobbying bloc, but they're creating real leverage on party leaders. And you look at, you know, what's happening this past year in politics, at the fringe blurring with the base. You know, I've been shocked at the lack of Republican leadership to stand up and say, you know, you can disagree with the president on the economic policies, and we have an obligation to offer alternatives. But don't compare him to Hitler. Don't compare him to communists. Don't compare him to the Antichrist. You know, why haven't more Republicans been standing up and doing that? Well, it's because I think many of them are afraid. Because they're afraid that if they don't take on the extremes in their own party, they might lose a closed partisan primary. Well, that's a sign of sickness in our politics. So that's, I think, you know, as a policy level, redistricting reform, I think, is essential to just rebalancing and making more representative our politics. And then more people just standing up. A lot of local mayor's races in the country, as I said earlier, over 8% are nonpartisan. And now, you know, you may, on facts on the ground, parties may still be powerful, but that would at least empower independents to run for mayor. We just need to remember that, you know, the Constitution doesn't mention the Democratic Republican Party. They are afterthoughts. So we need to get out of that mindset, have more people step up and raise an example, and the single most important policy change we can make, I believe, is redistricting reform. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.